Alright, what's up YouTube? It's time for another bit of an edit redo. If you follow my channel, you might have seen I did some videos on how to set up a Strat style guitar. I've gone ahead and deleted those videos because it didn't work. This one I'm not going to take the blame for, however, and if you don't believe me, feel free to go to the website, but what I followed direction-wise were directions on how to do a setup from the fender.com website directly. It didn't work. I've done a bunch of research and I've tried a few things myself. I've thought a few things. I'm probably not the first to think of these, but I came to the same conclusion, I guess you would say. But we're going to redo it. We're going to do it all in one video. I'm going to try and be as quick as possible. We're going to do this setup in 3 easy steps, and then at the end I think I'm going to put in a 4th step that most of you will not need to do. But if you wanted to do the nut replacement, which that video is still up and is still valid, same for blocking off the trem, by the way. If you did end up replacing the nut, you may want to go to step 4. If not, you guys can stop at step 3. So for most people that just have a factory standard that they didn't fuck with, this is going to be a how to set up your guitar in 3 easy steps. If you went and did some nut replacement, this is going to be how to set up your guitar in 4 easy steps. So without further ado, we are going to start off right away, and the first step is always going to be setting the neck relief. What is neck relief? Well, it is how straight or bowed the neck is. On most other style guitars, I am a big advocate for getting the neck perfectly straight. It works beautifully on my PRS guitars. It works on Gibson guitars. It does not work on Stratocasters. Does not. I tried to do it, it was unplayable, and that is when I started doing research, and that is what led me to do the video that I did last time on how to do a setup. So on a Stratocaster, the neck needs a little bit of relief. Why? Well, it has to do with how these things are built. I'm not going to go into the super details, but it has to do with how these things are built. The neck is basically straight from the body, whereas if I can't grab it right now, but if you take like a Gibson or a PRS style guitar, the neck is going to be at a bit of a back angle, and that makes all the world of difference. But this video is specifically for Strat and Strat style guitars. I'm going with the measurements and everything for a Stratocaster. If you are doing this on another guitar, I can't see why it would be much different. And again, this is how I figured out how to do it, and it worked for me. So that is all I have to say about that. So to start with, you're going to always need a tuner. For every single step, you want to have your tuner. We're going to need this, and we're going to use this a lot. You're going to need a capo to block off that first fret. So right behind the first actual metal fret, as straight as possible. If you don't have a capo, I would suggest you buy one. If you really don't want to and you have a friend handy, just get them to fret that first fret, because you're going to need your other hands. Now, the Fender website said, actually before we do that, the other tool you're going to need preferably is a set of feeler gauges. These are usually sold in like hardware stores in the automotive section. I think this was like less than $10. I don't remember I said how much it was. I think it was like $7 Canadian from Canadian Tire. And the feeler gauge we are going to use for our Fender is a 0.10 inch or 0.254 millimeter. And now the Fender website said we needed to fret the last fret, but nay. What you actually want to do, and it makes more sense to me now that I've thought about it, is fret the very first fret where the neck joint happens. On this, which is a 21 fret Fender Strat, 17th fret. Why? Well, to me, thinking of it logically again, your neck pocket and this whole section of the neck is basically held in place flat by 4 screws. And it's flat. It's not going anywhere. There's no way this is going to curve unless you have the screws very loose, which you really shouldn't. So the neck relief is going to be happening from right here and forward. This is what's going to play. This is staying flat. So if you fret this 17th fret, you want to go to the 7th fret. So this is the 3rd, 5th, 7th, and under the back side fret, you want to see if your feeler gauge fits. If you can fit it and you can move it around greatly before it touches the string, aka there's more space than this 0.010 inch between your fret crown and the string, you have too much relief. Oppositely, if you cannot put the feeler gauge under the string without moving the string, you don't have enough relief. Both ways we're going to fix this the same way, by adjusting the truss rod. How do we do that? Well, we're going to need the tool that came with our guitar, hopefully. On these Fender Stratocasters, it is a hex key, Allen key, whatever you want to call it. On stuff like Gibsons and PRSs, it's usually like a nut that is the adjustment inside the truss rod, so they give you like a specialized little wrench thing. If on some of my other Fenders, it is a big Phillips head, basically. And you're going to find the adjustment screw, whatever you want to call it, in two places. Either up here on the headstock. Some guitars will have a plate over it. Just go ahead and remove those 2-3 screws that are there. Remove the plate, put that aside for now. And you should have something that resembles this underneath. The other place you can find it on some guitars is down here under, sadly, half the time it is under the scratch plate, and which means you will have to remove the neck. Sometimes they do give you a bit of a gap, or the adjustment is a wheel. Most of my Fenders that have the adjustment under, you have to go ahead and remove the neck. It's a pain in the butt to do, but hopefully for you guys, you have the adjustment up here. So in both cases, you're going to want to take the tool, whether it be an Allen key or whatever, insert it into the head. I don't have the key with me now. I did this whole video earlier. It didn't record properly. I put all my tools away before I came back to edit the video, realized it was not good, so I'm redoing it now. But you would take your Allen key, if we pretend this is the Allen key, insert it into the adjustment. And now the important thing to have in your head is lefty-loosey, righty-tighty. How a truss rod works. And before we do that, actually, what is a truss rod? Some of you might ask. Well, inside your guitar neck, which is wood, there is a metal rod that is fixed at two locations, up here and down at the bottom. The whole point of this is to counteract the pressure that the string are putting on the neck, pulling it forward. And you have two kinds of truss rods. You have the single action, which are basically just there to counteract that, to force the neck back to straight. And then you have double action, or I don't remember the other name for them, double action truss rods, which basically have a rod going both ways, and you can, like they say, force it one way or force it the other. Now, the important thing in these cases is that this is a single action, so you are basically only tightening it or you're loosening it. There is no action the other way. In a case where there is too big of a gap, so you put the feeler gauge in and there was still a gap between the string and the feeler gauge, you have too much relief. If you have too much relief, what you want to do is tighten the truss rod to bring that neck back into line. You do that by inserting the tool. And this is just me, but I suggest you always, when tightening, I suggest you always loosen it a bit first just to make sure that truss rod is moving. Bring it back to where it was and then a quarter turn. If you want to reduce the relief, you want to tighten the truss rod so you're going towards the right. If it feels like it's sticking, if it feels like you would have to force to move it to the right and tighten it, stop right there, bring your guitar to a professional. They will be able to see if something is wrong. If you force it too much, you can break this. There is such a thing as over tightening. It will snap. If you break the truss rod, that is basically it for that guitar neck. Most places will not take the trouble of taking a neck apart to go and replace a truss rod. It is most of the time, unless it's a vintage instrument that you're trying to save, most of the time it's just more cost effective to go ahead and buy a new neck. And if I'm not mistaken, a neck on like a Fender Stratocaster is going to run you at least about $300. So don't force it, is basically the moral of the story. In the opposite case, where you were trying to put the gauge under the string, but the string was moving when you were trying to put it under, you need to give your neck more relief. That would be going to the left, untightening the truss rod, letting the rod loosen to give the strings, let the strings pull more on the neck, which will increase the relief. Again, either way, I would say go a quarter turn at most. A little goes a long way when you are adjusting truss rods. Important step, you then want to take off the capo, turn your tuner back on, retune the whole guitar, put the capo back on, refret that 17th, check your fret again, rinse, repeat till you are happy. I would always say err on the side of caution. A little bit extra relief is probably better than not enough. But obviously you want to get this as close to possible to our measurement. So that is how you would set the neck relief on a Fender Stratocaster style guitar. Step 2 is setting the action and setting the radius. I showed you guys how to do this in the last video, but again, it was wrong. And I'm just realizing I put away the tool. So 2 seconds. Oh, sorry about that. So they sell online, and if you don't have this, you can do this with a normal ruler, but this is just easier. So this is basically an action gauge. The important part is the black notches you see at the top and bottom. One side is metric, one side is imperial. We're going to go with metric because I'm in Canada. Fender website and the tool itself says on a 6-string electric guitar you probably want between 1.5 and 2 millimeters. I would say err on the side of caution and go with 2 millimeters. If you realize everything's fine and you're finding the action high, you can always lower it a bit after. Vice versa too, really. Now, Fender website said, I forget which fret they said to measure at. What I'm going to tell you guys to do is go to our 17th fret and measure off of that. So you want to take your gauge, put it on the crown of the fret at the 17th, and check. And you want basically that 6th string to be right at the edge of that 2 millimeter block. If you are too high or too low, it's very simple. Your guitar, again, hopefully should have come with a smaller Allen key. And that is used to adjust the little screws that are here in each one of these saddles. So again, you want to insert the Allen key and then depending on the adjustment, screw or unscrew to raise or lower the saddle. The important part here is to do both sides. Every saddle has 2 screws. You want to do both sides evenly. As much as possible, it doesn't have to be 100%, but you don't want to end up with a saddle that should be flat that is instead at an angle. The problem with that is that it'll end up pushing the saddles. It'll push all the saddles around. They won't be in line, and your string, the gap between the strings is going to be off, and it's just going to feel weird. So you want to get these as even as possible, as close to flat as possible. And again, just adjust, retune, remeasure, rinse, repeat till you get it right. Now, in the original video, I'd showed you guys how to do the radius on the strings with some radius gauges. This works. It's still a very valid way to do it. What you would do is set that 6th string to 2 millimeters. You would then grab your ruler again and set the 1st string again on the 17th fret to 2 millimeters. You would then take your radius gauge. This is an understring radius gauge. You would insert it under the strings and then basically set all of your strings according to the radius of your guitar. Stratocasters, modern ones, are 9.5 inch radius. That's one way of doing it. I was thinking this morning when I started doing this setup again, and I'm sure someone else has thought of this. Someone's probably made a video, but I just thought of it myself, not taking credit for it. Why are we setting the radius on the strings? Well, we're setting it to match the neck's radius. Say that 3 times fast. So, if we already know that the neck has a 9.5 inch radius, why do we need a tool to give us the radius? Taking our little business card type thing here, our string gauge, if we then go to the 17th fret for the 5th string and set that to 2 millimeter height, and so forth, and so forth, and so forth, we're measuring from the crown of the fret on a radius to the string. That will invariably set the radius to match the neck. That's just what I thought this morning, and to be honest, it seems to be fine to me. It feels great, it plays great. So, up to you guys. That's 2 ways that I would say to set the radius and the height of all your strings. Now, the important part is as follows. You've set all your action on all your strings, you've retuned, you're perfectly in tune. Go ahead and play every single fret on every single string. What happened to me last time is basically 15 and going forward would, on all the strings, would have no sound whatsoever. They were all fretting out so badly that they had no sound from the 15th fret forward. Now, fretting out means that literally it is touching all the frets so much there is no space for the string to vibrate and you get no sound from it. That is different from fret buzz, which I do have a little bit. I don't know if you can hear that, but we do have a little bit of fret buzz on the 6th string only from the 15th going forward. I'm okay with that because how often are you coming up here to play on the 6th string? Never, right? Or so rarely that I don't think it'll matter. But you want to make sure that none of your strings are fretting out. And then fret buzz is personal, up to you. If you prefer your action to be as low as possible and you're willing to deal with a bit of fret buzz, sorry, so be it. If you're the kind of person where any kind of fret buzz will drive you absolutely insane, that's fine. Go ahead and raise the action ever so slightly for that string alone. If you only have one string that's fretting out, the radius won't be perfect, but your action will be as low as possible. It's just me personally. If you really want to go ahead and make sure that the radius is 100% exact, well then you're going to have to measure what that string now is to remove all string buzz and then match the height on all the other strings. So moving on to step 3. Step 3 in our process is going to be setting the intonation of the guitar. What is the intonation? Well, intonation means that every single note is to perfect pitch. As perfect as humanly possible. This is not a precision instrument. This is a musical instrument. It's never going to be 100% perfect on every single fret, but we're going to do our best to get it as perfect as possible. How do you do that? Well, you're going to need 2 things. Our trusty tuner and for the most part, I might be something else, but for the most part, it's always going to be a Phillips head screwdriver. Now, intonation, how do we check it? Well, tune your E string to perfect E. You can double check with the 12th fret natural harmonic. I just find that more precise. That's just me. Your call. Once you know that your string is perfectly to pitch, what you want to do is play the octave note, so the 12th fret, and check what that registers as on your tuner. If it's not even an E, you have some major problems. Usually what'll happen is it'll be an E, but it'll be either a little bit flat or a little bit sharp. So a little bit low, a little bit high. We can fix that, and that is the whole point of the intonation, is getting our string to be perfectly to E and our 12th fret to be perfectly to E as well. Now, how I think of this and how I remember this every time is this is an E. E is from the nut to the saddle. Our string is vibrating and it's giving us an E. If we shorten the length of the string that vibrates, so if we fret, say, the 5th fret, now we have 5th fret to the saddle is what's vibrating, and that's giving us a higher pitch note, an A in this case, and that's how I remember what we want to do. So if you take that into account, longer the string, lower the pitch, shorter the string, higher the pitch. Well, if our 12th fret note is ringing sharp, we want to lengthen the string. If it's ringing flat, we want to shorten the string. Well, how do we do that, seeing as we can't really just add more string? Well, very simple. The saddles are adjustable back and forward. How you do that? Well, if you look down the back here, you will have a Phillips head, usually a Phillips head. If there's something else, you'll figure it out. You want to take your screwdriver, and then depending on if you're flat or sharp, you want to tighten or loosen the screw to move the saddle back and forwards, depending on what you're trying to do. This is another case of a little goes a long way. So just small adjustment, retune. It might not seem like it, but we've moved the saddle, it's changed the tension on the string, it's changed the pitch of the string, retune, recheck, make sure you went the right way, and keep going until you get this 12th fret perfectly to pitch, and then repeat for all your strings. And it's as simple as that, and now your guitar will be intonated correctly. So finally, step 4, and I'm leaving this for last because, again, most of you don't need to do this. If you want to check it, that's fine, but if your guitar is factory and you haven't changed the nut, you haven't messed with the nut, you're good, you're golden, don't bother doing this step. If, like me, you decided to change the nut to something a bit better, whether it be a Graphtec or a Tusk nut or something the likes instead of the cheapy plastic nut, then you're probably going to need to do this, and step 4 is setting the height of the string at the nut. How do we do this? Well, there's 2 ways. I think I showed this in the video when I changed the nut. I sanded down the nut to be as thick as matching another Fender guitar that I had, or as close to as possible. That's one way, but you want to get that rough, very rough, install it what seems right, and then what we're going to do is, instead of sanding down the back, we are going to deepen the channel for the string to sit in the nut. To check what, and this is what I came up with. I'm sure I'm not the first to say this. Some people will tell you fret the 3rd fret, check the gap, and it should be X measurement between the 1st fret and the string. Some people will tell you don't touch anything, check the gap between the 1st fret and the string, it should be X measurement. We're going to go way simpler than that today. We've done the intonation. We know that the note is correct. We know that the 12th fret is correct. Fret that 1st fret. Check what it's registering as. On our E string, which is almost perfectly tuned, if we do the 1st fret, it should be giving you an F. If it is giving you an F sharp, your nut is way too high and you probably did something very wrong. What will happen most of the time is that will be an F, but just slightly sharp. If you're flat, don't worry, it's not the end of the world. It's still fixable. You've got two options if it's flat, or three options, I guess I would say. And I've never had to do two of the following, but you can just go ahead and buy a new nut. You probably shave too much off the bottom when you put this in. The second option would be to either try this yourself or bring it to a professional by this point, but you can remove the nut again, put a shim underneath it, put the nut back over that shim, and hope that it's alright. I've also seen online, I've never tried this, I can't vouch for this, but I've seen a lot of people say that if you mix some baking soda with some super glue and fill the channel in the nut and then let that dry and then sand it back down and cut a new groove, you can kind of raise that groove a bit, but that would be only applicable if the string grooves in the nut were too deep all of a sudden. But like I said, for the most part, if you've changed the nut, and what will happen is it will be an F, but it will be sharp. That's fine. Again, if you're not comfortable doing this, bring it to a professional. I don't know how much they'll charge you. I've never had to do this. I just did it myself. And then the other option is to, like I said, do it yourself. You're going to need a couple of tools for this. They do sell nut files. I'm going to probably screw up and say fret files a bunch of times, but I mean nut files. We're not touching the frets today. They do sell nut files. They will come in a variety of gauges to match the typical string gauges. Luthier will normally use these to either notch a blank nut. They can use it to, if you bring in a standard guitar and you tell them I'm going to be putting a set of 12 to 60 strings on it, they will make the notches bigger to fit the bigger gauge strings. Or in the case of nut replacement, where you have to lower the channel to get the height done properly. The bad part is those files sell online. I looked quickly for about $80 to $90 US. Probably worth investing in if you want to start doing guitar repairs and stuff like that. I might, if I ever start getting a bunch of guitars people want me to fix. But looking online, and for the price of these, I decided to opt for this and see if it would work. A lot of people suggested to just go to a local hardware store where they sell welding equipment and buy a set. And I've also noticed a bunch of people are selling these on Amazon and so forth as actual nut files. These are not nut files. It works, but these are not nut files. These are actually a kit for welding, and they are used to clean the welding tips. But they come in a little box like this, and if you open it up, it's just a bunch of like metal rods with teeth in them to various gauges. Yeah, that's all it is. I would say that I haven't tried it. I don't think this would work if you have a completely blank nut and you're trying to cut channels into it, but I will vouch for this worked for just deepening channels in a pre-notch nut. I can't vouch for anything else. That's all I did. But like I said, the files sell for about $90 US. This little thing was $6 Canadian at Canadian Tire. So even if this didn't work, I was at $6, but it worked. So what you want to do is, again, like I was saying, make sure this is to pitch. Check that first fret. Make sure it's perfectly in F. If it's sharp, don't worry. Loosen the string. Move it out of the nut channel. Find the appropriate nut file, or the closest one of these. There are sizes on the back. What I ended up doing was just kind of eyeballing it. It looked about right. It fit in the gap without having to force it in. I went with that. So you want to, and nuts usually will have an angle to them, usually towards the headstock a little bit. You want to follow that and you want to just very gently, using your file, remove a little bit. Something that's helpful for this as well is just a can of compressed air to kind of blow the dust out and out of the way. So a little bit, put the string back, retune to pitch, check again. If you are getting very, very close, you might want to leave it there. Check your intonation, because we have changed the height, so we're going to need to redo step 3 again once we're done this. But I thought it was important to do step 3 first to get your intonation right, so that when you set the height, if we're checking that note is to pitch as well, you know. Anyway, so little bit by little bit, get it to pitch. If you're getting close, check your intonation. If your intonation is off, adjust it, check again. If you're right on the money, you're good. Then rinse, repeat for all the other strings. And again, it's better to err on the side of caution. If you take off little bit by little bit, you'd probably rather it be a bit sharp or high than, oh shit, I've gone too far and now I need to raise the nut. So there you go. And again, this step you probably don't need to do unless you have changed the nut or there's something really wrong with your guitar. But there you go. That is how to do a full setup of a Stratocaster or Stratocaster type guitar in 3 easy steps for most of you, 4 steps for the adventurous types like me that change the nut. And you will end up with a Stratocaster that is very comfortable to play, nice low action, and perfectly in tune.